would you do if the one secret that could save a life was also the one that could destroy your own? For 4 years, she kept a wounded Apache chief hidden from the world, until the day his tribe discovered the truth. And what happened next is something you won't forget. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story, and where you're watching from and why you're following this. The Arizona Territory stretched endless and unforgiving under the merciless sun of 1878, a land where the desert wind carried both whispers of ancient spirits and the echoes of a brutal conflict between two worlds colliding. In the small settlement of Copper Ridge, nestled between rust-colored mesas and thorny mesquite trees, lived Catherine Morgan, a 26-year-old widow whose beauty was as striking as it was lonely. Her golden hair, which she kept pinned beneath a bonnet during the day, caught the sunlight like spun wheat, and her green eyes held depths of intelligence and determination that set her apart from the other women in town. Catherine had arrived 3 years prior with her husband, a prospector who had died in a mining accident just 8 months after their arrival, leaving her with a small ranch house on the outskirts of the settlement and a stubborn will to survive in this harsh landscape. The ranch house itself was modest but sturdy, built from adobe and timber, with thick walls that kept the interior cool during the scorching days and warm during the cold desert nights. Catherine had learned to manage the property alone, tending to her small vegetable garden, maintaining the well, and caring for the 3 horses and handful of chickens that provided her with the means to survive. The townspeople of Copper Ridge respected her resilience, though some of the women whispered that it wasn't proper for a young widow to live alone so far from the main settlement. Catherine paid them no mind. She had learned long ago that survival in this territory required a kind of strength that had nothing to do with propriety and everything to do with adaptability and courage. The conflict between the Apache tribes and the American settlers had intensified over the past year, with raids and counter-raids creating an atmosphere of constant tension and fear. The United States Army maintained a presence in the region, and Colonel Harrison Blackwood, a stern career officer with graying temples and a reputation for ruthlessness, commanded the garrison at Fort Prescott, some 15 miles from Copper Ridge. Blackwood's mission was clear: to pacify the Apache by any means necessary, and to protect the growing number of settlers flooding into the territory in search of gold, copper, and new beginnings. The Apache, led by several prominent chiefs who refused to be confined to the reservations, fought desperately to protect their ancestral lands and their way of life. It was on a sweltering afternoon in late August when Catherine's life changed forever. She had ridden out to check on a section of her fence line that bordered a rocky canyon, where coyotes had been testing the barriers around her property. The journey took her nearly 2 hours on horseback, following a narrow trail that wound through clusters of prickly pear cactus and towering saguaros that stood like silent sentinels in the vast emptiness. As she dismounted near the damaged fence, she heard something that made her freeze: a low groan, barely audible above the whisper of the wind through the canyon. Catherine's first instinct was to remount her horse and ride back to the settlement for help, but something in the sound, something unmistakably human and filled with pain, compelled her to investigate. She secured her horse to a mesquite branch and carefully made her way toward the source of the sound, her hand instinctively moving to the small pistol she kept in her belt. What she found among the rocks at the canyon's edge would alter the course of her life in ways she could never have imagined. Lying partially concealed by a boulder, his body broken and bleeding, was an Apache man. But this was no ordinary warrior. Even in his injured state, Catherine could see that he possessed a bearing and physical presence that spoke of authority and strength. He was tall, perhaps 6 feet, with broad shoulders and a powerfully muscled frame that suggested years of hard living and fighting. His skin, the color of burnished copper, was slick with sweat and blood from multiple wounds, including a deep gash across his ribs and what appeared to be a bullet wound in his shoulder. His long black hair, partially unbound from its traditional wrapping, fell across his face, and his strong features, angular and proud, were contorted in pain. But what struck Catherine most were his eyes when they suddenly opened and fixed upon her, dark, intelligent, and filled with a defiant fire that refused to be extinguished, even by the evident agony he was experiencing. For a long moment, They simply stared at each other, predator and prey, though which was which remained unclear. Catherine's heart hammered in her chest, and her hand tightened on her pistol. She knew that Apache warriors were considered dangerous, and that anyone found aiding them would be treated as a traitor by both the military and the townspeople. Yet as she looked at this wounded man, she saw not a savage or an enemy, but a human being in desperate need of help. The wounds he bore were severe, and without treatment, he would surely die within hours in this unforgiving heat. The man tried to speak, but his voice came out as barely a whisper, his lips cracked and bleeding from dehydration. Catherine made a decision that would define the next 4 years of her life. She couldn't leave him here to die. It went against everything she believed about the value of human life, regardless of the color of skin or the circumstances of birth. But she also couldn't take him to town, where he would be either imprisoned or executed. There was only one option. She would have to take him to her ranch and tend to his wounds in secret. The task of getting him onto her horse was nearly impossible. The man was heavy, his muscular frame dead weight as he drifted in and out of consciousness. Catherine used every ounce of her strength, leveraging rocks and her own body to hoist him across the saddle. By the time she succeeded, her dress was soaked with sweat and his blood, and her muscles trembled with exhaustion. She walked alongside the horse, leading it carefully back toward her ranch, constantly watching the horizon for any sign of other riders. The journey that had taken 2 hours to travel now stretched into nearly 4, as she moved slowly and cautiously, trying to avoid jarring his injuries. By the time Catherine reached her ranch, the sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple that seemed to set the desert ablaze. She managed to get the wounded Apache into her house through the back entrance, dragging him onto a thick blanket she had spread on the floor of her small storage room, a windowless space at the back of the house that she rarely used. Once she had him settled, she collapsed for a moment, catching her breath and trying to calm the racing of her heart. What had she done? She had just brought an Apache warrior, possibly a wanted man, into her home. If anyone discovered this, she would be finished. But there was no time for doubt now. Catherine gathered her medical supplies, such as they were: clean cloth for bandages, a needle and thread for stitching, whiskey for sterilization, and various herbs and remedies she had learned to prepare during her time in the territory. She boiled water on her stove, then returned to the storage room where the man lay unconscious. By the light of 2 oil lamps, she began the painstaking work of cleaning and treating his wounds. The bullet wound in his shoulder was deep but clean, having passed through without hitting bone. Catherine poured whiskey over it, and even in his unconscious state, the man's body jerked at the burning sensation. She worked quickly, stitching the entry and exit wounds with practiced hands, though her fingers trembled slightly. The gash across his ribs was more troublesome, a long, ragged wound that would require numerous stitches. As she worked, she found herself studying his face more closely. He was extraordinarily handsome, with high cheekbones, a strong jaw, and features that seemed carved from stone. There was a nobility in his appearance that spoke of leadership, and she wondered who he was, what position he held among his people. It took Catherine hours to finish treating all his wounds and injuries. She bound his ribs, dressed his shoulder, and treated numerous smaller cuts and bruises that covered his body. When she was finally finished, she covered him with blankets and sat back, exhausted. The man's breathing was shallow but steady, and his fever, while high, didn't seem life-threatening. She had done all she could. Now it was simply a matter of waiting to see if he would survive the night. Catherine barely slept that night, checking on her patient every hour, giving him water when he seemed responsive enough to drink, and monitoring his fever. She knew that if he survived, she would face an entirely new set of challenges. How would she keep his presence secret? How would she communicate with him? And most pressingly, what would she do when he was well enough to leave? These questions swirled through her mind as she sat in her kitchen, watching the first light of dawn creep through her windows. The next day brought its own complications. Catherine's nearest neighbor, Sarah Hutchinson, rode over mid-morning to borrow some flour, as she often did. Catherine met her outside, determined not to let her into the house. They chatted for a few minutes about the weather and the latest news from town. Sarah mentioned that Colonel Blackwood's soldiers had been involved in a skirmish with Apache warriors 2 days prior, and that the military was searching for survivors, including a prominent chief who had escaped. Catherine felt her blood run cold, but managed to maintain her composure, nodding sympathetically and expressing her hope that the conflict would soon end. After Sarah left, Catherine hurried back inside to check on her patient. He was awake, his dark eyes following her movements with a mixture of wariness and confusion. She approached slowly, her hands raised to show she meant no harm. For a long moment they simply looked at each other, two people from different worlds, thrown together by circumstance and connected by an act of compassion that transcended the boundaries of their respective societies. Catherine smiled gently and spoke in a soft voice, though she knew he likely couldn't understand her words. But perhaps he could understand her tone, her intention to help rather than harm. Over the following days, a strange routine developed between them. Catherine would bring him food and water, change his bandages, and gradually help him regain his strength. He remained silent for the most part, watching her with those intense dark eyes. But slowly, very slowly, something began to shift between them. There was a moment, perhaps 5 days after she had found him, when their hands touched as she was adjusting his bandages, and an electric current seemed to pass between them, something neither could deny or explain. It was in that moment that Catherine realized her life had become infinitely more complicated, because what she felt stirring in her heart was not just compassion for a wounded stranger, but the first dangerous stirrings of something deeper, something that could destroy them both if discovered. As the weeks passed, Catherine's life became a delicate dance of secrecy and routine. She continued her daily activities in town, purchasing supplies, attending church on Sundays, and maintaining the appearance of a respectable widow living quietly on her ranch. But her true life, the one that consumed her thoughts and filled her heart with equal parts fear and exhilaration, existed within the hidden confines of her storage room, where the Apache warrior she had saved continued his slow but steady recovery. By the 3rd week, the man was strong enough to sit up and take more substantial food. Catherine had learned through careful observation and gesture that his name was Takoda, which she later discovered meant friend to everyone in his language. The irony of the name was not lost on her, given that he was considered an enemy by nearly everyone in the territory. But more significantly, through whispered conversations with old Miguel, a Mexican ranch hand who occasionally helped her with heavy work and who had lived among various tribes in his youth, Catherine learned the truth about her patient's identity. Takoda was not merely a warrior, but a respected chief of his band, a leader known for his strategic brilliance in battle and his unwavering commitment to protecting his people's freedom. He was one of the men Colonel Blackwood most wanted to capture or kill. The knowledge should have terrified Catherine, should have made her realize the enormous danger she had placed herself in. But instead, as she looked at Takoda, seeing not just the fierce warrior but the man beneath, she found herself drawn deeper into a connection that defied all logic and reason. He had begun to speak to her in halting English, words he had learned from traders and captured settlers over the years. His voice was deep and resonant, and when he spoke her name, Kater-een, the way he shaped the syllables sent shivers down her spine. "Why you save me?" Takoda asked one evening as Catherine brought him dinner. He was sitting up now, his back against the wall, his wounds healing remarkably well thanks to her diligent care and his own formidable constitution. The lamplight cast shadows across his face, highlighting the strong planes of his cheekbones and the intensity of his gaze. Catherine set the tray down and sat on the small stool she had brought into the room for her visits. She had asked herself the same question 1,000 times. "Because you needed help," she said simply. "Because I couldn't let you die out there in the heat, alone and suffering. It wouldn't have been right." Takoda studied her for a long moment, his eyes searching her face as if trying to understand not just her words, but the woman behind them. "Your people kill my people. My people kill your people. This is war. Why you care if I die?" Catherine felt her throat tighten with emotion. "Because before we are enemies, we are human beings. Because I believe that every life has value, regardless of which side of this terrible conflict we were born into. My husband died here in this territory, and I know the pain of loss. I couldn't add to that pain by letting another person die when I had the ability to help. Something shifted in Takota's expression, a softening around his eyes that suggested her words had touched something deep within him. "You are not like other white women," he said quietly. "You have brave heart, strong spirit." "I'm just trying to survive and do what I think is right," Catherine replied, feeling heat rise to her cheeks under his intense scrutiny. "And speaking of surviving, we need to talk about what happens when you're fully healed. Colonel Blackwood's soldiers are still searching for you. They've been questioning people in town, looking for any sign of wounded Apache warriors. You can't stay here indefinitely." Takota's jaw tightened, and for a moment, the warrior returned to his features, hard and unyielding. "I will not go to reservation. I will not live in cage while my people suffer. I will fight until I die or until we are free." "I'm not suggesting you surrender," Catherine said quickly, "but we need to be careful. If you're discovered here, they'll hang you, and they'll likely imprison me or worse for harboring you. We need a plan." Over the following days, as Takota grew stronger, they began to develop a strategy for his concealment. The storage room was transformed into a more comfortable living space, with a proper bed, books that Catherine brought him to pass the time, and better ventilation. Catherine installed a false panel in the wall that could be quickly closed if anyone came to visit unexpectedly. She taught Takota to move silently through the house during the night, when he could stretch his legs and regain his strength without risk of being seen through the windows. But beyond the practical arrangements, something profound was developing between them. Catherine found herself spending longer and longer periods in the storage room, talking with Takota about everything from their childhoods to their dreams and fears. He told her about growing up in the mountains, learning to hunt and track from his father, and the devastating impact the encroachment of settlers had on his people's way of life. She told him about growing up in Boston, her marriage to a dreamer who had dragged her west in search of fortune, and her unexpected discovery that she was stronger and more resilient than she had ever imagined. "In my culture," Takota said one evening as they sat together, their shoulders nearly touching in the small space, "we believe that sometimes the spirits bring two people together for a purpose, that their paths cross not by accident, but by design." Catherine felt her heart racing. "And what purpose do you think brought us together?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Takota turned to look at her, and the intensity in his dark eyes made her breath catch. "Maybe to teach us that the walls between our peoples are not as strong as we believe. That underneath we are the same. We love, we fear, we hope, we dream." The air between them seemed to crackle with unspoken emotion. Catherine knew she was standing at a precipice, that if she allowed herself to fall, there would be no going back. But as she looked into Takota's eyes, she realized she had already fallen, that somewhere between saving his life and learning his heart, she had tumbled headlong into feelings she had never expected to experience again. "Takota," she breathed, and then his hand was reaching for her face, his calloused fingers gentle as they traced the line of her cheek. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing as sensation overwhelmed her. When she opened them again, his face was inches from hers. "Katerine," he murmured, and then his lips were on hers, soft and firm, and filled with a passion that ignited every nerve in her body. She responded without thinking, her arms going around his neck, her fingers tangling in his long black hair. The kiss deepened, becoming something fierce and desperate, as if they were both trying to pour months of longing and connection into a single moment. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Catherine felt tears streaming down her face. "This is impossible," she whispered. "We can't. The world won't allow it." Takota cupped her face in both his hands, his thumbs wiping away her tears. "The world does not decide what is in here," he said, placing her hand over his heart. "Only we decide. I know it is dangerous. I know many will not understand. But my heart has chosen you, Katerine, and Apache warrior does not go back on what his heart knows to be true." Catherine laughed through her tears, a sound that was equal parts joy and despair. "My heart has chosen you too," she admitted. "But what are we going to do? How can we possibly be together when the entire territory is at war?" "We will find a way," Takota said with the quiet confidence of a man who had led others through impossible situations. "But first, I must heal completely, and then we must be very careful, very patient. The months that followed were the strangest and most emotionally intense of Catherine's life. By day, she maintained her role as the respectable widow of Copper Ridge, but by night she was something entirely different. The woman who loved an Apache chief, who lay in his arms in the darkness and dreamed of a future that seemed impossible, but that they both desperately wanted. Their physical relationship deepened naturally, becoming a refuge from the dangerous reality that surrounded them, a space where they were simply two people who loved each other without the complications of war and prejudice. But the outside world continued to intrude. Colonel Blackwood intensified his campaign against the Apache, and Catherine heard horrifying stories of villages destroyed and families torn apart. Each story made her hold Dakota tighter, made her more determined to protect him at any cost. Dakota, for his part, was torn between his love for Catherine and his duty to his people. He knew his warriors needed him, that his leadership could mean the difference between survival and destruction for his band, but he also knew that leaving Catherine would tear his heart in two. "I must go back to my people," he said one night as they lay together, his arms wrapped protectively around her. "They need me. My second Nantan is good warrior, but he is young. He does not have experience to lead against soldiers like Blackwood." Catherine had known this moment would come, had dreaded it with every fiber of her being. "When?" she asked, her voice tight with unshed tears. "Soon, maybe 2 weeks, but Catherine—" He turned her to face him, his eyes intense in the moonlight that filtered through the small window. "I will come back for you. This I promise. When it is safe, when I have secured place for my people where we can live in peace, I will return, and I will take you with me, if you will come." "Of course I'll come," Catherine said fiercely. "I would follow you anywhere. But Dakota, what if something happens to you? What if you're captured or killed? How will I know?" "You will know in here," he said, placing his hand over her heart. "If I die, you will feel it. And if I am alive, you will feel that too. We are connected now, Catherine. Nothing can break that. Not distance, not time, not even death." Catherine wanted to believe him, wanted to trust in the strength of their connection. But she had lived in the Arizona territory long enough to know how brutal and unforgiving it could be, how quickly life could be extinguished in the ongoing conflict between the Apache and the settlers. Still, she nodded and held him close, trying to memorize every detail of this moment, knowing that the days ahead would require more strength than she had ever needed before. The 2 weeks passed too quickly, filled with stolen moments and desperate lovemaking, with long conversations and comfortable silences, with the building of memories that would have to sustain them through the uncertain future. On the final night before Dakota's departure, Catherine gave him a small silver locket that had belonged to her grandmother, inside which she had placed a lock of her golden hair. He gave her a pendant made of turquoise and silver, crafted by his own hands during the long months of his recovery, strung on a leather cord. "Wear this always," he said as he fastened it around her neck. "It will protect you and remind you of my love. And when you see the moon rise, know that I am seeing the same moon and thinking of you." They left before dawn, Catherine leading him through the dark desert to a meeting point where his warriors waited. The reunion between Dakota and his men was emotional, the warriors clearly relieved and overjoyed to see their chief alive. Catherine stood apart, her heart breaking as she watched Dakota speak with them in their own language, watched him transform back into the leader and warrior he had been before his injuries. But before he mounted his horse, he came to her one final time, pulled her into his arms and kissed her with a passion and tenderness that made her knees weak. "I will return for you," he whispered against her lips. "Wait for me, my love. No matter how long it takes, wait for me. I will wait forever if I have to," Catherine promised, tears streaming down her face. "Be safe, my warrior. Come back to me." And then he was gone, riding into the breaking dawn with his warriors, leaving Catherine standing alone in the desert with a broken heart and a love that burned brighter than the rising sun. The months following Dakota's departure were the longest and most agonizing of Catherine's life. She moved through her days like a woman in a dream, performing her duties mechanically while her heart and mind remained fixed on the man she loved and the dangers he faced. The small turquoise pendant never left her neck, hidden beneath her high-collared dresses, a secret talisman that connected her to Dakota, across the vast and dangerous desert that separated them. The war between the Apache and the settlers intensified dramatically. Colonel Blackwood, frustrated by his inability to capture or kill the elusive Apache leaders, became increasingly ruthless in his tactics. Catherine heard stories in town that made her blood run cold. Villages burned, women and children relocated to distant reservations under armed guard, warriors hunted down without mercy. Each report sent waves of terror through her heart, and she spent countless nights staring at the moon, clutching the turquoise pendant and praying that Dakota was alive and safe. 3 months after his departure, Catherine received her first sign that he was thinking of her. Old Miguel appeared at her door one evening with a small leather pouch. "A rider left this for you, Senora," he said quietly, his dark eyes knowing. "He said you would understand the message." Inside the pouch was a single eagle feather and a small piece of parchment with a crude map drawn in charcoal, showing a location in the mountains to the north. Catherine's heart soared. Dakota was alive, and he was trying to communicate with her. Over the following months, more messages arrived through Miguel, who had apparently earned the trust of Dakota's warriors through his respectful treatment of Apache people over the years. Each message was brief but filled with meaning. A lock of black hair tied with a leather cord, a smooth river stone painted with symbols that Miguel helped her interpret as declarations of love and longing, a pressed wildflower from the mountains where Dakota was hiding with his band. Catherine treasured each one, keeping them in a small wooden box that she hid beneath the floorboards of her bedroom. But as the months stretched into a year, then 2, Catherine began to feel the weight of her secret pressing down upon her. She was living a double life, respected on the surface by the community of Copper Ridge, while harboring in her heart a love that would condemn her if discovered. The loneliness was crushing, and there were days when she wondered if she had the strength to continue waiting, to continue hoping for a future that seemed increasingly impossible. It was during the 2nd year that Catherine's situation became even more complicated. Colonel Blackwood, having noticed her during one of his periodic visits to Copper Ridge, began to pay her unwanted attention. He was a widower himself, a man of considerable influence and power, and he made no secret of his interest in the beautiful widow who lived alone on the outskirts of town. His visits to her ranch became more frequent, always under the guise of checking on her safety or discussing the Apache threat, but his intentions were transparent. "Mrs. Morgan," Blackwood said during one particularly uncomfortable visit, his cold blue eyes studying her with an intensity that made her skin crawl, "You are a remarkable woman, living out here alone with such grace and courage, but it is not safe, and it is not proper. I think you should consider accepting my protection in a more permanent capacity." Catherine understood exactly what he was suggesting, and the thought filled her with revulsion, but she also knew she had to be careful. Blackwood was a dangerous man, one who could make her life extremely difficult if she rejected him too harshly. "Colonel, I appreciate your concern," she said carefully, "but I am managing quite well on my own. I am not ready to consider any such arrangement at this time." Blackwood's jaw tightened, but he maintained his composure. "I understand that you need time to grieve your late husband, but time passes, Mrs. Morgan, and opportunities do not wait forever. I hope you will reconsider my offer. A woman like you needs a strong man to protect her, especially in these dangerous times." After he left, Catherine felt sick to her stomach. She knew that Blackwood was not a man who accepted rejection easily, and his interest in her could become a serious problem. She sent a message through Miguel to Dakota, warning him of this new complication, and waited anxiously for his response. The response came 2 weeks later, and it was not what Catherine expected. Dakota himself appeared at her ranch in the dead of night, slipping through her back door like a shadow. Catherine nearly fainted when she saw him standing in her kitchen, more beautiful and powerful than she remembered, his long hair flowing loose around his shoulders, his dark eyes burning with intensity and concern. "Dakota!" she gasped, throwing herself into his arms. He caught her and held her tight, his face buried in her hair, his body trembling with the force of his emotion. For long minutes they simply held each other, trying to bridge the 2 years of separation with the desperate strength of their embrace. You should not have come, Catherine whispered even as she pulled him closer. It is too dangerous. If anyone sees you here, we will both be killed. I had to see you, Dakota said, his voice rough with emotion. When I got your message about the soldier chief, I knew I could not wait any longer. Katerine, I have been trying to find a way for us to be together. I have been negotiating with Mexican officials across the border, trying to secure safe passage for my people. If I can get them to safety in Mexico, then you and I can be together without fear. Catherine pulled back to look at his face, her hands framing his strong jaw. How long will this take? And what about your people? Will they accept me? Dakota's expression grew troubled. That is part of why I came tonight. My people know about you, Katerine. I could not keep such important things secret from them. Some understand and accept. Others, he paused, choosing his words carefully. Others are angry. They say I betray our people by loving white woman. They say you are enemy, that I am weak for caring for you. Catherine felt her heart sink. She had known that their love would face opposition from both sides, but hearing it stated so bluntly made the reality of their situation even more painful. What do we do? She asked quietly. We must be patient a little longer, Dakota said, pulling her close again. I have plan, but it requires time. Maybe 6 more months, maybe year. Can you wait that long? Can you stay strong while this soldier chief pursues you? I will wait as long as necessary, Catherine said firmly. I have waited this long. I can wait longer. But Dakota, you must promise me that you will be careful. The army is hunting you more aggressively than ever. Blackwood has increased the reward for your capture to $5,000. That is enough to tempt even loyal men to betrayal. I am always careful, Dakota assured her, though his eyes held a shadow of worry. But tonight I am here with you, and I do not want to waste our time talking of dangers and enemies. I want to hold you, to love you, to remember why I fight so hard to make a future for us. They spent that night together, making love with a desperate intensity born of long separation and uncertain future. Catherine memorized every detail of Dakota's body, every scar that told a story of survival, every muscle that spoke of strength and endurance. She whispered her love against his skin, and he responded in both English and his own language, words that sounded like poetry even when she did not understand their literal meaning. Before dawn, Dakota had to leave. Catherine clung to him at the door, tears streaming down her face. When will I see you again? She asked, hating the desperation in her voice. I will send messages through Miguel, Dakota promised, and I will try to come again when it is safe. But Katerine, you must be very careful with this soldier chief. Do not anger him, but do not encourage him either. Give him no excuse to hurt you. I will be careful, Catherine promised. You be careful too. Come back to me, my love. Always come back to me. After Dakota disappeared into the darkness, Catherine returned to her empty house and wept until the sun rose. The brief reunion had been both a blessing and a torture, reminding her of everything she had and everything she stood to lose. The following months were increasingly difficult. Colonel Blackwood's pursuit of Catherine became more aggressive, and she found herself having to deflect his advances with increasing frequency. The townspeople began to notice his interest, and some of the women started treating Catherine with barely concealed hostility, jealous of the attention the powerful colonel was paying to the widow. Catherine felt increasingly isolated, caught between a community that would condemn her if they knew the truth, and a man she loved but could not openly claim. It was during the 3rd year of Dakota's captivity in her heart, though he was free in body, that the situation reached a crisis point. One of Dakota's warriors, a young man named Kuruk who had always opposed his chief's relationship with a white woman, was captured by Colonel Blackwood's soldiers. Under torture, Kuruk revealed that Dakota had been hiding in Catherine's house for months after being wounded, and that the chief was in love with her. The revelation sent shockwaves through both the military and the civilian population of the territory. Catherine was arrested and brought to Fort Prescott for questioning. She was held in a small, windowless room while Colonel Blackwood conducted the interrogation himself, his earlier romantic interest now transformed into cold fury. You harbored an enemy of the United States, he said, his voice like ice. You gave aid and comfort to a savage who has killed American soldiers and settlers. You are a traitor, Mrs. Morgan, and you will hang for it unless you cooperate fully with us." Catherine, though terrified, refused to betray Dakota. "I saved a wounded human being," she said steadily. "I would do the same for anyone, regardless of their race or allegiance. And yes, I grew to care for him, because he is a good man fighting for his people's survival. If that makes me a traitor in your eyes, then so be it." Blackwood's face turned purple with rage. "You stupid woman. You have thrown away your life, your reputation, your future, all for a savage who will never be able to give you anything but misery and death. I could have given you everything, security, status, protection, but you chose him instead. You will regret this decision for the rest of your very short life." But before Blackwood could carry out his threat to imprison or execute Catherine, something extraordinary happened. That very night, Dakota led a daring raid on Fort Prescott itself, a move so bold and unexpected that it caught the entire garrison off guard. His warriors moved through the darkness like ghosts, avoiding the main defenses and focusing their attack on the building where Catherine was being held. The rescue was swift and brutal, with Dakota himself breaking down the door to Catherine's cell and sweeping her into his arms. "I told you I would always come for you," he said as he carried her through the chaos of the fort under siege. Catherine wrapped her arms around his neck and held on tight, her heart pounding with terror and exhilaration as bullets whizzed past them and soldiers shouted in confusion. They escaped into the night, riding hard for the mountains where Dakota's band was camped. But Catherine knew that everything had changed now. Her rescue had been witnessed by dozens of soldiers, and her relationship with Dakota was no longer a secret. There would be no going back to her ranch, no returning to her old life. She had irrevocably crossed the line between the two worlds, and now she belonged fully to neither, or perhaps to both. The Apache camp in the mountains was unlike anything Catherine had ever experienced. Hidden in a remote canyon surrounded by towering pine trees and protected by natural rock formations that made it nearly impossible to approach undetected, the camp housed approximately 60 members of Dakota's band, including warriors, women, children, and elders. As Dakota rode into camp with Catherine seated in front of him on his horse, every eye turned to watch them, and Catherine felt the weight of their collective scrutiny like a physical force pressing against her. The reaction was immediate and divided. Some of the people, particularly the younger children who ran forward with curiosity and excitement at seeing their chief return safely, seemed merely interested in the strange white woman he had brought with him. Others, especially several of the older warriors and some of the women, looked upon Catherine with expressions ranging from suspicion to outright hostility. Catherine understood their reaction. She represented everything that had brought suffering to their people: the endless wave of settlers, the broken treaties, the stolen lands, the murdered families. Dakota dismounted and helped Catherine down, his hand firm and reassuring on her back, as he led her toward the center of the camp where a large fire burned. An elderly man with deeply lined face and long gray hair, wearing traditional clothing adorned with intricate beadwork, stood waiting. This was Chayton, the medicine man and one of the most respected elders of the band. His dark eyes studied Catherine with an intensity that made her feel as though he could see directly into her soul. Dakota spoke in his own language, his tone respectful but firm. Catherine could not understand the words, but she could sense he was explaining her presence and defending his decision to bring her to the camp. Chayton responded, his voice grave and measured, and a discussion ensued that involved several other senior members of the band. Catherine stood tall and met their gazes directly, refusing to show the fear that churned in her stomach. She had not survived 3 years of secrecy and longing only to cower now. Finally, Dakota turned to Catherine and said in English, "Chayton says that you must prove yourself worthy of being here. He says that just because I love you does not mean our people must accept you. You must show through your actions that you respect our ways and that you are willing to stand with us, not against us." "I understand," Catherine said clearly, then looked directly at Chayton and spoke slowly, hoping her tone would convey her sincerity, even if he could not understand all her words. "I respect your people and your ways. I know I am an outsider, and I know I must earn your trust. I am willing to do whatever is necessary to prove myself. I love Dakota, and I want to stand beside him and beside all of you in whatever struggles lie ahead." Chaitin's expression remained impassive, but something flickered in his eyes that might have been approval. He spoke again, and Dakota translated, "He says you will be watched closely. Any sign that you are a spy or that you bring danger to our people, and you will be sent away or worse. But he also says that any woman brave enough to risk her life for love deserves a chance to prove herself." Over the following weeks, Catherine threw herself into learning the ways of the Apache people. She was assigned to work alongside the women, and though many of them were initially cold and distant, Catherine's genuine efforts to help and learn gradually began to soften some hearts. She learned to prepare traditional foods, to tan hides for clothing and shelter, to gather medicinal plants under the guidance of the older women. Her hands, once soft from her life as a settler woman, became calloused and strong. Her skin, protected all her life from the sun, darkened to a golden bronze. One of the first to warm to Catherine was Amma, a young woman about her own age, who had lost her husband in a raid by Colonel Blackwood's soldiers. Amma had a 3-year-old daughter named Helona, a beautiful child with enormous dark eyes and an infectious laugh. Despite her initial wariness, Amma seemed to recognize something in Catherine, perhaps a shared experience of loss and resilience. She began teaching Catherine their language, patiently correcting her pronunciation, and helping her understand not just words, but the cultural context behind them. "You speak like baby learning first words," Amma said one day with a rare smile as Catherine struggled with a particularly difficult phrase. "But your heart is good. I see why our chief loves you. You do not think you are better than us like other white people. You learn, you listen, you work hard." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes at this unexpected acceptance. "Thank you, Amma. Your friendship means more to me than you know. I never wanted to be an enemy to your people. I only wanted to save one man's life, and in doing so, I found a love I never expected, and a world I am coming to understand and respect deeply." As the weeks turned into months, Catherine's integration into the band continued, though not without challenges. There was one warrior in particular, Nantan, Dakota's second-in-command, who made his disapproval of Catherine's presence abundantly clear. He was the one who had been leading in Dakota's absence, a capable warrior in his late 20s with a fierce loyalty to his people and an equally fierce distrust of all whites. One evening, as the band gathered around the fire for the evening meal, Nantan stood and addressed Dakota in front of everyone. Though Catherine's understanding of the language was still limited, she caught enough words to understand the gist of his challenge. He was questioning Dakota's judgment, suggesting that the chief's love for a white woman had compromised his ability to lead, that bringing Catherine to the camp put everyone in danger. Dakota rose to his feet, his expression hard as stone. When he spoke, his voice carried the unmistakable authority of a leader who would not tolerate his decisions being questioned in such a manner. The exchange grew heated, with several other warriors joining in, some supporting Nantan's concerns and others defending their chief's right to make his own choices. Catherine felt her heart pounding as she watched the confrontation unfold. She understood that this moment was critical, that the unity of the band could fracture over the issue of her presence. Before she fully thought through what she was doing, she stood and stepped forward, her voice clear and strong as she spoke in their language, her words halting but determined. "I know many of you do not trust me. I know I am white, and whites have brought terrible suffering to your people, but I am not your enemy. I love Dakota with all my heart, and I have risked everything to be here with him. I have lost my home, my community, my entire life as I knew it. I can never go back to my people now. This camp, these mountains, and all of you are my home now, whether you accept me or not. I will prove myself worthy. I will work harder than anyone. I will fight beside you if I must. But I will not leave Dakota, and I will not betray you. This I swear on my life." The silence that followed Catherine's speech was absolute. Every eye in the camp was fixed on her, and she could feel the intensity of their collective gaze. Then Chaitin rose slowly to his feet and walked toward her. Catherine held her ground, meeting the old medicine man's eyes steadily. When he reached her, he studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly and spoke words that Dakota translated with obvious emotion in his voice. "He says that you have the heart of a warrior and the spirit of one who belongs to the land, not to any single people. He says that if you and Dakota wish to join your lives together in the traditional way, he will perform the ceremony and the people will witness it. Catherine felt tears streaming down her face as the meaning of Chaitin's words sank in. She looked at Dakota, who was watching her with such love and pride that her heart felt as though it might burst. He came to her and took her hands in his, speaking in English so she would understand every word. "Catherine, I have loved you from the moment I woke in your house and saw you caring for my wounds with such gentleness and courage. You saved my life, but more than that, you saved my heart. You have given up everything to be with me, and I want to give you everything I have in return. Will you join your life to mine in the way of my people? Will you be my wife and stand beside me through whatever trials and joys the future brings?" "Yes," Catherine said without hesitation, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, 1,000 times yes. I will be your wife, your partner, your equal in all things. I love you, Dakota. I have loved you since the day I found you broken and bleeding in that canyon, and I will love you until the day I die and beyond." The ceremony took place 3 days later, at sunset when the sky was painted in brilliant shades of orange and purple that seemed to set the mountains ablaze with color. Catherine wore a traditional dress that Amma and the other women had made for her, soft deerskin decorated with intricate beadwork and fringe that moved gracefully as she walked. Her golden hair, which she had grown long during her time in the camp, was woven with wildflowers and feathers. Dakota wore his finest traditional clothing, his long black hair unbound and flowing around his shoulders, his powerful frame radiating strength and dignity. Chaitin performed the ceremony with ancient words and rituals that had bound Apache couples together for generations. Catherine and Dakota stood before him, and before the assembled band, their hands joined, their hearts beating as one. They made vows to each other in both English and Apache, promising to honor, protect, and cherish each other for all their days. When Chaitin declared them husband and wife according to the laws of the Apache people, the camp erupted in celebration, even some of those who had been most skeptical of Catherine joining in the joy of the moment. That night, as Catherine lay in Dakota's arms in the private shelter that had been prepared for them, she felt a peace and happiness she had never known before. Despite all the hardships, all the dangers they still faced, all the uncertainties of their future, in this moment she was complete. She was where she belonged, with the man she loved, accepted by his people as one of their own. But their peace was not destined to last long. 2 months after their wedding, scouts brought word that Colonel Blackwood was leading a massive force of soldiers and Apache scouts from rival bands into the mountains, determined to destroy Dakota's band once and for all, and to recapture or kill Catherine as an example to any other settlers who might consider sympathizing with the Apache. The band had no choice but to flee, beginning a desperate journey toward the Mexican border, where Dakota had been negotiating for sanctuary. The journey was grueling, covering harsh terrain in the dead of winter, with soldiers constantly on their trail. Catherine proved herself during those terrible weeks, keeping pace with the warriors, helping care for the children and elderly, never complaining even when her feet bled and her body screamed with exhaustion. There was one particularly harrowing night when the soldiers caught up with them at a river crossing. A fierce battle erupted, and Catherine found herself fighting alongside the warriors, using a rifle that Dakota had taught her to shoot. She would never forget the terror and adrenaline of that fight, the sound of bullets whizzing past her head, the sight of people she had come to care for falling wounded or dead. But she also would never forget the fierce pride she felt when Dakota looked at her across the chaos of battle and saw not just his wife, but his true partner, fighting for their survival and their future. They lost 7 people in that battle, including young warriors and one elderly woman who had been kind to Catherine from the beginning. The grief was crushing, but there was no time to properly mourn. They had to keep moving, had to reach the border before Blackwood's forces could overtake them again. Finally, after 3 weeks of running and fighting, they crossed into Mexico. Dakota's negotiations had been successful, and they were met by Mexican officials who had agreed to allow the band to settle in a remote area of Chihuahua, far from the border and the reach of the American military. The relief was overwhelming, and Catherine watched as members of the band, these strong, proud people who had endured so much, broke down, and wept with the realization that they were finally, truly safe. Colonel Blackwood and his soldiers stopped at the border, unable to pursue them further without creating an international incident. Catherine stood at the edge of Mexican territory, looking back across the border at the Arizona territory she had once called home, and felt no regret. That life was behind her now, as distant and unreachable as a dream. In the months that followed, the band began to build a new life in their sanctuary. They established a permanent camp near a reliable water source, began cultivating crops alongside their traditional hunting and gathering, and slowly started to heal from the traumas of the past years. Catherine became an integral part of the community, respected for her courage during the flight to Mexico, and valued for her skills and knowledge that complemented those of the Apache people. 1 year after their arrival in Mexico, Catherine discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with overwhelming joy and terror in equal measure. She was going to have Dakota's child, a child who would be part of both worlds, who would carry the blood of both peoples in their veins. When she told Dakota, he lifted her off her feet and spun her around, his face radiant with happiness. "This child will be a bridge between our peoples," he said, his hand gentle on her still flat stomach. "A symbol that love is stronger than hate, that understanding is possible even between those who seem most different. And this child will know both their mother's courage and their father's strength, both the stories of the white world and the wisdom of the Apache." Catherine gave birth to a son 9 months later, assisted by Amma and the other women of the band. The labor was long and difficult, but when she finally held her baby in her arms, when she looked into his perfect face and saw features that blended Dakota's strong bones and dark coloring with her own fine features and lighter skin tone, she knew that every moment of suffering, every sacrifice, every risk had been worth it. They named him Nightshade, which meant mischief maker in Apache, and from his first breath he lived up to that name. He was a strong, healthy child with his father's dark eyes and his mother's golden undertones in his skin. The entire band celebrated his birth, this child who represented hope for the future and the possibility of unity. As Catherine sat outside her home 5 years after first finding Dakota wounded in that canyon, watching her son play with the other children while her husband worked nearby preparing weapons and tools, she reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her to this moment. She had lost everything from her old life, her home, her community, her position in white society. But she had gained so much more, a love that transcended all boundaries, a family that had accepted her despite every reason to reject her, a son who would grow up knowing both worlds, and a sense of purpose and belonging that she had never felt in her previous life. Dakota came to sit beside her, his arm going around her shoulders in a gesture of affection that still made her heart skip a beat even after all these years. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I am thinking about how strange and wonderful life is," Catherine replied, leaning into his warmth. "How a single decision to show compassion to a wounded stranger changed the entire course of my existence. How what seemed impossible became reality through determination and love." "Regrets?" Dakota asked quietly, though she could hear the certainty in his voice that she would say no. "Not even one," Catherine said firmly, turning to look at him with all the love she felt shining in her eyes. "You are my home, Dakota. Wherever you are, whatever challenges we face, that is where I belong. I would make the same choice 1,000 times over." Dakota pulled her close and kissed her deeply, a kiss that still held all the passion and intensity of their early days together, but now also carried the weight of shared experiences, of battles fought and survived, of a life built together against all odds. When they broke apart, both were smiling. "Come," Catherine said, standing and extending her hand to him. "Let us go play with our son. Let us enjoy this peace we have fought so hard to achieve. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges, but today, in this moment, we have everything we need, each other, our child, our people, and a future full of possibility." As the sun began to set over the Mexican mountains, painting the sky in the same brilliant colors Catherine had seen on that fateful day when she first found Dakota, she watched her husband chase their laughing son through the camp, watched Amma and her daughter join in the game, watched Chaitin smile from where he sat carving a piece of wood, and felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. This was her family now. These were her people, and this was her home. She had crossed an impossible divide, bridged two worlds through love and courage, and in doing so had found the truest version of herself. The white woman who had hidden a captive Apache chief for 4 years had become so much more than either identity could encompass. She was Catherine, wife of Chief Dakota, mother of Naiche, member of the band, warrior in her own right, and living proof that love could indeed conquer even the deepest divides. And as she joined her family in their play, her laughter ringing out across the camp to mingle with theirs, she knew that this was not just a happy ending, but a beautiful beginning to a life that would be filled with love, purpose, and the joy of belonging.